Happy day, everybody. It's me, Greg Delmage, and you've got some more podcast news to listen to. As of this recording, wrapping up in a few days, is Chinatown Detective Agency's crowdfunding campaign that Tina Ola covers in this week's Crowdfunding Chronicles. So if you want to go check out this excellent-looking little mystery novel sort of adventure game, give it a read. We bring it up a little bit on this episode, but Jo Padilla has been working on a Final Fantasy XIV focused feature called Man Must Own the World, Final Fantasy XIV Gaius von Belser and the Praetorium Speech, where he kind of analyzes what's going on inside the head of one of the biggest antagonists from A Realm Reborn. It's a great piece to dive into, and I definitely recommend you give it a read if you have enjoyed any of Jo's work before. Now we go over to the reviews department, where we got a few things to cover as well. First one's kind of a big deal. Nathan brought it up on the last episode, but his Persona 5 Royal review has finally dropped with great aplomb as he speaks quite highly of it. It got editor's choice from him, and it's shaping up to be a really great revisit to Persona 5. In kind of the same vein, Joe Chop gave editor's choice to the Shin Megami Tensei Liberation DX2 mobile RPG that has hit iOS and Android lately. It's good to hear that a gacha RPG has held up so well, and if you got some room on your phone, probably go check that out. Upon completing Persona 5 Royal, it's only natural Nathan wanted to jump into something lighter, right? No, not at all. Instead, he has been previewing Sakura Wars, and you can go see how Sega's latest RPG is shaping up for us. And finally, we close things out with a few slightly delayed posts from the video review team. First of all, a little more timely, the Final Fantasy VII Remake video review is up, so if you want to see how that game is shaping up alongside Alana's review, please go check out our video, give us a like and subscribe and everything else on YouTube. As well, we went back and revisited Little Town Hero that Nathan reviewed for us, just to again give you a taste of what that looks like. So yeah, go support our videos on YouTube. And that's it. That's enough me talking. Except, for the next hour and a half of the episode, but whatever, who's counting? On to episode 187. Hey everybody out there, how is it going? I always find when I do my big whole hey everybody, it comes in really hot, so I'm sorry if your ears bleed for half a second whenever I start the episodes. But here we are, another episode of Random Encounter with myself, Greg Delmage, as your host. We are at 187 now. Still far away from retro, but whatevs. I am joined by some stellar folks today. As always, you know him, you probably love him. If you don't, you should probably get to know him better because he's pretty cool. Jono Logan over here on the mic.
Aw, thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in weeks, because I haven't seen anyone in weeks.
Right? I mean, you're living with your partner, but it's very easy to just kind of at the point be like, you're there always, whatever. I don't need to compliment you anymore. You're not going anywhere.
You can't.
Exactly, right? Anyways, I also have some other lovely folks who haven't been on the episodes for a while. Alana Hagues, how you doing over there?
Hey, yeah, not too bad, thank you. Always lovely to be back on and be on with Jono for the first time, obviously. So, yeah, it's going to be a good time.
Oh, that's
I'm
right.
super excited. I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too.
Then I'm glad to bring a new team together. I also have another lovely folk returning. Over here is Jo Padilla.
Howdy. How's it going?
It's going pretty well, Joe. Thank you for asking. But assuming you were asking me specifically, I'm not sure.
No, it's just
The other two can answer.
It was a general out to everyone.
So you can email us at rpgfan@podcast.com to give your response to "Hey, how's it going?" from Joe.
Very specific. Very. I know that's a loaded question.
You'll get some essays possibly.
I'm a fan of essays.
That is true, and you had a very in-depth, well thought out one. Which actually I meant to ask. Now that we have you both on here, actually, before we get into things, you had your big feature kind of exploring the, how useless the struggle of Yakuza is in the grand scheme of things.
Yep. Yep, the futility in it.
The futility.
There we go.
Thank you. That is the word I was after. Did you, having gone through that whole series, Jono, did you get around to Joe's article or no?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was great, and I agree with them. I think the funniest thing is on the Yakuza collection video review. Every single time I summarize the game, I always start it with the Tojo clan is in crisis, because it always is. That's every single game. Every game is the Tojo clan is in crisis, and only Kiryu can save it.
But like what? I mean, I guess you probably wrote more or less like what inspired that in there. But just at what point in the series did this feature start kind of percolating for you, Joe?
Well, I've only played Yakuza Kiwami. So I've only played like the.
Oh, I thought you had done one of the other ones. Okay.
Yeah, it was just the first one that I've played, and I'll be playing Yakuza 0 for a thing later on. So I'm trying to kind of get into this rhythm of when I play a game, if I found it interesting in some sort of way or essay worthy, to write something on it so I can kind of reflect and kind of ease out of it more, rather than just being like, well, that was fun. Okay, now on to the next thing.
Right. I mean, that's why myself and Solosy podcast, so we have a stage, I guess, to do that on, and bring folks like yourselves on to do that. But that's a nice way to kind of decompartmentalize the whole process and let your thoughts come out. Because there's times where you just need to talk about it. I mean, some games you can just leave them, but I think a lot of them, especially stuff like the Yakuza series where there is so much of it that sprawls, you do want to unpack those thoughts. And based on Joe's article, Jono, does that kind of hold true? Do you find that futility, does that ever get more important than just the violent struggle for money?
Not really. I mean, I love Yakuza, but I love Yakuza. I love the characters. I love everything about the series, really. But to be honest, it kind of holds to the original in terms of its plot. Kiryu doesn't really evolve as a character, to be completely honest.
That's interesting. That
I love him, but he doesn't really evolve as a character. He's still the same granite-faced idiot by the Yakuza 6 that he is in Kiwame or Zero.
And I mean, I don't know. You could argue that because then the first one is when he goes, he's quit, right? And then he gets roped back in to protect like the orphan kids he's looking at.
No,
which one's that?
That's the third one.
Sorry, that's the third one. My bad.
And the fourth one and the fifth one, actually.
Okay.
It's the entirety of Yakuza just seems like Godfather Part 3, but with more orphans.
Oh my god.
And probably of better quality than Godfather Part 3, so.
Yeah, it's not hard.
And considerably more karaoke.
Right? And then idols and anyways. I was just curious, just to see how like that affected your thoughts on the game, on the series, since you have played it obviously more extensively, Jono.
Well, Joe, you've been churning out some really great thought-provoking articles lately. You also have the one on it just came out a few days ago from recording, Final Fantasy XIV.
Yes. Yeah, I've really liked the villain in the main. I guess I don't know if you'd call him the main protagonist, but one of the main antagonists, one of the antagonists in Final Fantasy XIV 2.0. I wrote about him and how there's a lot of shades of Benito Mussolini and kind of Roman emperors in him. So I found some really interesting parallels there. So
It's something I find doesn't often get talked about in reviews and in game journalism in general is, those comparisons to where possible inspirations came from for a lot of this stuff. So it's usually, it comes down to the fans who go more in depth in fan sites and finding out like, where did this summon come from? Where did this name come from for this leader? And, all that sort of stuff. So I like that you're looking into that. That's really great.
thank you.
But that brings us to a good point to segue, because there's another big Square Enix gem that just came out, and I feel like folks may have heard of it, may have played it, may want to hear more about it, since Alana Hagues here was the one who reviewed it for us at the website. Final Fantasy VII R. We've been waiting for that remake. For Royal. We've been waiting for that game for ages, and it's here. It came out on April
10th.
10th, thank you. It came out on April 10th, and Alana, you got it on right on embargo, I think, right?
Yeah.
We got it out right in time.
Yeah, we
You
did.
plowed through that.
Yeah, probably, this might be no exaggeration, I don't think, probably the biggest game I'll ever review, I think, especially for RPG fan. It was daunting as hell.
And you did it. I mean,
Yeah.
those. I feel like it was a committed 20-hour day job kind of thing to get through that. I don't know, how long was that playthrough for you?
So I clocked in at under 35 hours with most side quests done. I hadn't really touched hard mode or anything, but it's longer than you think, and some chapters vary from half an hour to 45 minutes to a good 4 hours, I would say, the longest chapter, a rough guess. So, yeah.
And it's bananas that they basically took what was once a roughly 5-hour portion of a game and have been extended out to be roughly half of the original game. Because I feel like my Final Fantasy VII playthrough might have been on the shorter side, came in at around 60 hours.
Wow, that's, I would
can't
say
remember.
that an average playthrough for 7 is about 35 to 40 hours most.
I think that's me just doing lots of extra stuff.
You probably did Knights of the Round and everything, yeah, but if you just...
That's, I think maybe with doing full completionist, yeah. So yeah, considering the fact then there you go, that you could also pretty much get through the whole game in the time it's taking you to get through Remake, which is just the opening moments.
Yeah.
What are we in for with this whole trilogy? Oh my gosh.
I know, or however much there's going to be, really.
Or however much, yeah, not necessarily trilogy.
We don't
Quintilogy.
know. God, yeah. We don't know, and I'll say by having finished the game, and I don't know if Jo has finished it as well, because I know that you're playing it as well,
Yes.
we don't really know what's going to happen. Even after beating it, I could not say what's going to happen, and that's where I'll leave the ending kind of discussion for now.
Yeah, we'll do our best not to spoil for folks, but obviously there will be some stuff touched on. Jo, how far into it are you?
I am halfway through the second to last chapter. So
You're on the long one, yeah.
yeah. So I'm probably only a few hours out. I imagine I'll finish it, blurry-eyed tonight. But I've got about 40 hours on my game clock, and I wasn't that hyped about it. I think I was sufficiently excited and such, but as it was coming closer, I was like, well, maybe I'll pick it up at some point and play through it. But I got the chance to play it, and wow, I am pretty thrilled with it, honestly.
Yeah, it's super good. I'm so glad to hear that. Because obviously last year you went through your big Final Fantasy series journey, didn't you? So I'm assuming that was your first time playing Final Fantasy VII last year as well. So you haven't necessarily got the nostalgia that myself and probably a few other people have, which I think is really interesting. Yeah, so it's really cool to see that you've come in with that perspective and gone, oh, do you know what, this is great, and you can appreciate. I don't know, what did you think of the original specifically?
I really like the original. Yeah, I hadn't played more than 5 hours of a Final Fantasy game up until February 2019, and then from February 2019 to January of this year, I finished 6, 7, Tactics, 8, 9, 10,
Wow.
12.
That's so wonderful.
Tactics
and
as well
15.
in there. Gosh.
Yeah, Tactics was the one I put the most hours into, of course. So
Yeah,
That makes
I can
sense.
believe that, yeah.
God, it's so good. But 7 was definitely in the top 3 of the ones that I played. I really liked it. But I liked that game a lot. But I didn't really feel too much affection for those characters. I liked them.
Yeah.
But this game has endeared me so much more to them.
I think that's one of the strengths of the remake personally, and it's something I tried to highlight really well, is that I think that 7 Remake does the cast so much justice. Even when you have some problems with some of them, Barrett's kind of affectionate chatter about his daughter, the chatter he has with Tifa, there's one section where Tifa's asking Barrett about something and Barrett quotes something and Tifa's like, oh, that's from one of Marlene's books, isn't it? And he goes, yep, and then he quotes it again and talks about how much Marlene loves that book. And there's so much sometimes RPGs can get a lot of criticism for the additional banter that characters can have between sections or in battle and things, but 7 Remake does it so well, and they're, you know, we love these characters because we've grown up with them, but the remake is like, it just dials everything up to 10, and they're perfect almost, I would say. They're so good.
Yeah.
The line that really got me in your review was that the characters were exactly how you imagined them when you were a kid.
Exactly, yeah. And that's exactly how I felt. Like, Cloud has been... I know Cloud is a bit of the target for this because of the Advent Children transformation that he had, where he was a bit more, you know... but, yeah, like, he was this cocky little... You know, he'd have chatbacks. He would just be ready to smear you or drag you whenever he wanted, and that came across here. But also, like... He's really conflicted, and you get that really well. I don't think that's maybe as well portrayed in the original, but like they bring it out really well here. So, yeah, I think that was important. That it is the whole game really is how you imagined it as a kid. You know, remember in 1997 when those FMV cutscenes were like the absolute best thing in the world? You probably imagined you imagine them like they are now. Like in Remake. Mm-hmm. It's incredible.
And you go back, it's like not quite the same. I mean, they hold up okay, but yeah, it's not as amazing as you think.
The jump...
That's the trick about nostalgia.
Yeah, the jump between 7 and 8 is quite scary, actually. Like, the quality in FMV sequences and graphics is amazing. It's like, wow. And then you realise then that 7 hasn't aged quite as gracefully, but...
Do you think, like, getting more of this conflict from Cloud, getting more characterization... Because I assume they've added some content. I haven't been trying to spoil myself too much, so I haven't really looked at a lot of playthrough and such, so I don't know how much to the story has been added. I've seen a few moments where, that's directly from there. Those are direct quotes from the original script that I can recall. But do you find, I guess my question is, do you find that they added it to get more character and that's what it is, or is it better localization? Because that was one of the things that 7 definitely had against it. And back in the day was some really rough localization.
Yeah.
They did the best they could.
Exactly, yeah. It's a fledgling time. I mean, look at Secret of Mana and things like that, how rough those were. Or...
They definitely improved, but yeah.
I would say it's definitely a bit of both. I think it is a really good localization, but I think there's just the wiggle room now, isn't there? Like, Midgar is a 5-hour section where you mostly control 4 characters, and they've now got the time to shine, and there's even room for all of these other characters like Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, who benefit the most out of all of the old characters from this additional screen time. Like, we grow attached to them because we know what they do, and, like, in the original, we know what they do, and we sympathize with Avalanche, but here you actually get moments where you're talking to Jessie on her own, or you're talking to Biggs on his own, or you're talking to Wedge. Wedge lives in a house and there's about 10 or 20 cats outside of it, and he loves them.
He's a cat dad?
He's a cat dad.
Yes.
Wedge is a cat dad, exactly.
And
crazy cat dad.
And Wedge, if anyone's watched Breaking Bad, Wedge is voiced by Badger from Breaking Bad.
Yes.
So it is perfect. It is the perfect casting.
That's why it sounded familiar. Okay.
And overall, like, basically all the voice acting I thought has been pretty great. Usually in these game stuff, I'll notice some voice acting that kind of takes me out of the immersion in some way because it's just noticeably
bad.
Yeah, like, noticeably lacking in terms of voice direction or something. Because a lot of these voice actors are quite talented, but the direction kind of falls flat. The dialogue is snappy. The localization and writing is good. Their interactions are wonderful. Like when you first meet Aerith, her interactions with Cloud are lovely. I was so charmed by this entire cast. They're really great in this.
Which Alana spoke to, that a lot of the main cast definitely hold up well. I guess a bit more of the tertiary characters that you found were a bit overacted or didn't quite land well.
I don't know whether this is my, again, nostalgia brain talking, but out of the most of the main characters, I think Sephiroth's voice doesn't fit, and I really struggled with it, and I can't decide whether it's, unfortunately, George Newbern, who was the previous voice actor for Sephiroth right up until Dissidia NT. He really got Sephiroth and he really embodied it, and I don't like making the comparison because I think all the other actors do better. In fact, Tifa's and Cloud's in particular, I think, are so good and have just really nailed the character, but I can't decide with the new voice actor for Sephiroth whether it's the voice or whether it's the fact that he's talking in Kingdom Hearts riddles for about 3/4 of the entire game. So I just can't make up my mind. And yeah, there's a couple, and I think going to voice direction quickly, I find Barrett's tiny bit problematic.
Yes.
But it's like the same as the original. Like, Barrett is written like a famous black character who everybody knows, and it's kind of run with it here. Yeah.
And Advent Children definitely ran with it, and it was Bo Billing.
It was Bo Billing, so yeah, it was.
Yeah, and it was the same in the game too, right?
Yeah. What, in the remake, or?
In the remake, yes, because it was him and Advent Children.
It's different voice actor. All the main cast of different voice actors. Yeah, none of the originals have been.
Oh, even Cloud, because I find the guy sounded very similar.
Yeah, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but Tifa's voice actress is in Glow, the wrestling. Yeah. So
Britt Baron, is that
Britt
her name?
Baron? Yeah.
Which is a good change. I mean, yeah, I agree with your assessment that she sounds great. Not to knock on Rachel
Lee Cook. Yeah.
Rachel Lee Cook. She did fine, but it's just it's also better script, I think, too.
Yeah, I think it's just a combination of everything. Like, it's been 23 years, and I think the industry knows these characters so well that they know what to do with them and where to push them. Maybe now, it's just a thought, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Joe, you were going to say?
Yeah. I agree with Alana's assessment on Barrett, where it's difficult because I would have liked to have seen. I don't know if anyone's seen Tim Rogers' series on the original Japanese version of Final Fantasy VII, and how Barrett is kind of presented in this more like traditional sort of stoic samurai sort of way. And I would have liked to see that more, but I think for American audiences, like they associate Barrett with this sort of Mr. T character, and and it's
someone who is always pitying the fool.
Yeah, and I get why they kept that, but I from like a marketing standpoint, from I'm sure that there would have been some sort of fan outrage about it, but like the fans are going to get angry about anything, as we saw last year with the whole like, why is Tifa wearing a sports bra thing?
Oh,
God. Not to bring that back up again, but yeah, I agree that I would have liked Barrett to be would have liked for Barrett to not be portrayed in that way, but I think with what they've done, he's still a very endearing, enjoyable character. Still pretty well written, and that's kind of the main thing. But yeah, also agree on Sephiroth. I think it is the voice acting. I think the direction is just kind of off. Another, not to get too deep into the weeds of the voice acting, but I really like that President Shinra is voiced by James Horan, who was the voice of Skullface in Metal Gear Solid 5. Which he's markedly better in this game, which is a blessing, because in Metal Gear Solid 5 he is so bad that it's very enjoyable.
Oh, James Horan, yeah.
Yeah.
That actor, wow, he did a bad job. That's weird, because he's usually pretty solid.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
I think it was more so just James Horan in a Hideo Kojima game, more than saying anything about his talent. It's just weird matching up. Like, he didn't know what exactly the context of his lines were in that game, which is pretty messed up.
God.
So, that's weird.
Yeah,
where was the director? Jeepers.
Who knows? Who knows what was going on in the Kojima verse? But this is not a Kojima podcast. I apologize.
No, this is a Yakuza podcast.
Oh, that's right. Got it.
Yakuza Encounter.
Yakuza Encounter. In terms of other stuff in this game is gorgeous. When it wants to be, it is just there. It is just stunning. And I've found very few, frame rate drops and technical hitches in terms of in combat. There's some bad texture pop in the slums and such. But when that game wants to be, and it usually does want to be, it's probably the most beautiful game I've seen.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning, isn't it? Yeah, I think even with all the pop-ins and the texture issues that I spotted, like, there was nothing I loved more than walking around every area and seeing it go from pre-rendered backgrounds to what we've got now is remarkable. Like, everywhere, you did get a sense of scale in the original Final Fantasy VII, but like in Remake, you really, really get a sense that the slums are
doubles down.
Yeah, the slums are alive. Like, they're full of people getting together and chatting. And there is, I'm going to do a minor spoiler for a chapter. You do get to see the upper plate in one section. It's late at night. And there's a marked difference in, like, I mean, it's late anyway, but, like, it's a lot colder, quieter. Things are much neater and cleaner. And you definitely get this sense that, I don't know, like, the Undercity, the underplate, is where everything is alive, and it is the upper plates areas that are bad, so I think it does a really good job with that. But yeah, like, just taking in everything, like, it's incredible. Like, the character models are stunning, and I'm astounded that there are no frame rate drops. Like, I don't think I had a single frame rate drop, or even, like, a really noticeable one, and you get them in fighting games and everything, but not here, apparently, which is pretty remarkable, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a feat, and I mean, you could argue that the PS4 is in its twilight years now at this point with the 5 coming out, so they could have just maybe been trying to optimize it for 5 and then not had it be as strong on 4, so on the PS4, so it's going to be it's really impressive that they've pushed it so hard and still, it's remaining intact, because your gripes about graphical issues were pretty minor.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think at this point, even though I was hopeful for a patch, I feel like they'll wait until the inevitable PC release next year when the exclusivity deal runs out now.
That's possible.
I really liked your point about kind of the difference between the upper plate and then the slums in terms of, like, it being alive and such. It made me think of I was talking with Mattia earlier this morning, my aunt, and we were talking about, like, how you make solutions when you don't have a lot of money. And she said, good thing about growing up in poverty, you never forget how to make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
Which I was like, wow, that was profound. But I feel like the game really captures that so well, because there's so much community and there's so much community and interconnectedness in the slums. And then when you go up to this upper plate, it is just like the suburbs. It's distanced, it's isolating in a way. You know, you feel the warmth in individual spaces, like the space you go into when you're on the upper plate, but it's not as full of life as the slums are, and full of people mingling and interactions and such.
And do you think this now new take on Final Fantasy VII and on Midgar specifically, with a greater attention to, the focus on community and the geopolitical climate of, the environmental struggle and the little guy fighting against the big man, do you feel that it's even more relevant now with just our general global political climate? Or do you feel like they've been able to kind of, like, tap into it more and make this even more relevant with just some new takes on the dialogue and the world? Like,
oh, yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, even the original is relevant now, I suppose, because of how environmental.
It is.
Yeah. They really do run with it, and there's a few things that. There's one particular story thread that they add, which is, and people who've played the demo will know this. The reactor explosion at the very beginning of the game, or the end of the demo. It's actually made worse by Shinra, and you see them deliberately do it. And so the whole game runs with this essentially fake news storyline where Shinra are trying to make out that Avalanche are worse than they are, and also in a conspiracy with another group. I won't say who, just in case. But
That's
like,
fair.
yeah, they just like ram it down that, Avalanche are bad. It's not like, it's not the same as the original.
yeah, because there was hints that they were being painted as terrorists, but obviously they didn't go too far into it, but just a lighter tone to it. And so it's nice that they can give more into the manipulation they're trying to play.
Yeah, I mean, Avalanche are terrorists, essentially. There's never any doubt
They
about
are,
that.
but-
Yeah, but like,
yeah.
I know what you mean. They're trying to make it worse. Like, Shimmer are using it to their advantage, and they're doing it even more so now to push their own agenda
exactly.
in different ways. Yeah.
They're trying to use them as like the focus as to, well, they're the reason why everything's so bad.
Yeah.
We're not murdering people and taking advantage of people. It's people like Avalanche, that's not Avalanche's goal.
Right. And I think it's something that's as relevant that it was 23 years ago as it is today. Like in 1997, what were popular games at the time, like GoldenEye and such. And so having a game where your protagonists in the game and the people you're supposed to be most sympathetic towards are eco-terrorists in it. And I think that's even in present day, when there are still games that come out like The Division 2 and things like that, having a sympathetic group of eco-terrorists and understanding their plight and the oppression that they endure, and knowing that these are the heroes of your game. These are people who are not opposed to, who are not, completely pacifists and such. And how exactly that plays in the world. And I think the game does a fantastic job of showing their struggle as oppressed people under this massive corporation, and of being portrayed as like essentially foreign agents, and just from personal experience and such of if you're fighting for something better, if your methods are somewhat aggressive or something, well, you're in league with foreign powers, or you're being I can't tell you the number of times where people have told me that where like people have said that I'm being bought up by George Soros, or or that I'm in Russia's coffers or something, and it's like. And that's what.
If you could funnel some of that money towards the site, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, well, yeah. Just apply for a grant with me. I'll get you all the Soros and Putin money you need, apparently. But I really felt for them when I saw that happening and what they were being accused of, when they just were fighting for a better life for themselves and their communities.
Right, and I don't think the original's as good at pushing that. Like, you definitely feel sympathetic towards them, but I think, again, because of the local, Baby's first localization back in 1997 or wherever, and I was 7 or 8 years old when I first played it, like, a lot of this stuff went over my head, and the more I've replayed the original and playing this, yeah, like, I really get it as someone who does and fight for change and wants to make a difference. Seeing another group of fictional people do it is really eye-opening, because they really capture it, I think, now. And I think it's just the 23 years, as Joe said, it's now as relevant as it always has been. But Remake does the best job of getting its purpose across and really working with what the original intention was and making it clearer.
Definitely.
It's interesting. I mean, the word terrorist is considerably more loaded now than it was in 1997. Right. I remember reading something about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The character of Kira was a terrorist, and they probably wouldn't have been able to do that after 2001. Nowadays, if you want to put that kind of thing in, you need nuance. You need a more active conversation about what these people are doing and the consequences of what they're doing and how they are demonized by the people in power.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this does, yeah.
Yeah, I found that really great, and I think a lot of it would fall flat on its face if its characters weren't so strong and they weren't so sympathetic. And so it's just all over. I think it's, for the most part, the game's kind of a triumph, I think. And I mean, I still haven't seen the ending and such, so I don't know what exactly that's going to be. It could
still fall flat.
Yeah, it could absolutely fall flat on its face. But
I mean, judging from Alana's score, though, I don't think it will, but...
No, probably not. But
the ending did not affect what I said too much, but it's definitely gonna rock the boat for a lot of people, especially someone else on staff finished it yesterday, and I've been having extensive conversations with them. They are not happy with how things have shaken out, so...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they are really unhappy with the ending, and they are the first... Yeah, I mean, again, it might come from their nostalgia for the original. I think the thing is with Final Fantasy VII, because at the time reviews dropped, a lot of people were like, oh, this is too high, or oh, this is too low, as they are with everything. But I think for 7 in particular, it is such an important game for so many people. Like, for most people, it's probably their first RPG, and like, for things like, it's such an important game in history that anything that is a hair out of line, someone will either freak out or they'll be like, oh, I just accept that, it's fine. Everyone's going to have such a different reaction to the game because everybody has so many different personal attachments to it, whether it be in Midgar or be in the rest of the game beyond Midgar. So it's going to draw different reactions out of everybody, and it's really interesting to see it play out. And I'm particularly interested in people who've played 7 more recently, or people who've never played 7, like, are going into this cold. It will be extremely interesting to see.
Which is, Joe's kind of in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm definitely very interested. I wouldn't worry, because I think it's handled better than some people are reacting, but yeah, it's definitely going to rock.
Could I ask, without spoiling it, because I've been desperately trying to avoid spoilers, I know something happens at the end of the game that is crazy, but I don't know what it is yet. But given the magnitude, the reaction to this change, will this change alter the trajectory of the following games from the original Final Fantasy VII plot?
Potentially.
Ooh.
That's a bold choice.
Oh,
yes.
boy. Oh, God.
We can speculate all we want, and we will be doing a spoiler episode on the site, so we're going to rip this whole thing apart and do everything we can.
Yep.
But
And
yeah.
Myself, Alana, and the person on staff who is very upset about it, I think are all on that episode. So.
That's going to be a really good one to listen to.
Yeah.
I might, since I just had my birthday, and I've had, I wasn't even thinking of this back when that it was going to be a thing. I was like, but I've been getting some birthday money. I was like, oh, maybe that'll go to Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Because I was going to be probably not getting it into it till I started going back to work on the regular and such, but it might be a gift thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, if you have time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just stunned the fact that, like, 90s, even some of the slightly lower scores, I mean, this is a game that's 15 years in the making. The fact that it is a triumph to this level is just a stunning achievement.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the best Final Fantasy game, aside from 14 that we've had since. I love 12, but most people would say 10. So,
I also love 12. So.
It is so good.
Same.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's the best Final Fantasy
go
game
off
we've
that.
had since at least 2006, I would say.
Yeah, there was a lot riding on this, and a lot that they could have gotten wrong. Like, this could have very easily ended up, like, Left Alive. You know, it just could have been like, oh, good, a return to this amazing series, and nope, it's terrible. You know, from what I've seen from footage, it feels very much and looks very much like just they learned from the mistakes of Final Fantasy 15 and implemented some of those better things into here. But it is funny watching, like, Cloud and, like, Tifa wander through the slums, and I'm like, oh, you got some Final Fantasy 15 in this game. It's like, they opened the bleakness, the dinginess, which 15 did well, and it's, like, dingy environments and such, but it's definitely, I'm glad that it landed on its feet very well for whatever fans may or may not agree with. The general journalistic community seems to be pretty on board.
And a
And
good
that's good
chunk
for
of the
the team.
fans, yeah, and a good chunk of the team as well. Yeah, a good chunk of the fans love it, and I'm really delighted to see people accepting the changes as well as they are. Like, it's really nice to see the discussions around it. And you brought up 15, and I think 13 as well. The game takes from both of those games, and I think, you know, it takes from 15's combat and polishes it. It adds the stagger system from 13. It kind of gets the balance between the linearity of 10 and 13 just right, I think, in the middle between the two. It takes from a lot of those modern Final Fantasy games, and I feel like it takes the best parts of them and refines them. So it does really good with modern Final Fantasy, and it just, like I said, it's probably the best Final Fantasy we've had for years, not including 14, which is outstanding and deserves every bit of praise that it gets.
Yeah, I definitely agree with just, there's so many things in this game where it feels like it was something I saw in Final Fantasy 15 and felt like it just did not articulate well. From the combat. Like, basically, there are three things I like about Final Fantasy 15. The chocobos, Ray Chase's voice acting, and one really random platforming dungeon that was made by one person. If anyone's played the Ruins of Piteous, which is incredible. Love it so much.
You're clearly not a fan of noodle cups.
Yeah, no, there are no noodle cups in this game that I know of, and it's,
we'll see what the DLC brings.
Oh yeah, it's all noodle cups in the DLC, but the combat, the summons, the even the technical performance, because they were trying to push for this uncapped frame rate with 15 that just did not work, in my opinion. So it's great, and we haven't really even touched on the combat, but it's real good. It's some real good combat.
It's super good, yeah. Like, I love a good action RPG. I hold it as high as I would Tales of Graces and Star Ocean 4, which I think the combat is really good, but the rest of the game is terrible. But yeah, it's so good. I think favorite Final Fantasy combat system, quite potentially. Yeah,
Ooh,
why not?
That's high praise too.
Yeah.
Because I thought, did it change much from the demo?
I mean, you definitely get more skills, so you learn new. So you know how Cloud has Braver, that is off of the Buster Sword. And then you pick up another sword which will have Triple Slash. If you put that on, if you keep using Triple Slash, you'll learn that eventually, and you can use those skills more and more. So you build up.
Kind of like Final Fantasy 9s, where like you pick up the skills, but once you've learned them, then you permanently have them.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Oh, dope.
It. Yeah. And you can level up all your weapons at the same time, which is really nice. You don't have to equip them to do it, and you can tell them to auto level, which is great.
Good.
Yeah. So it does some really nice things. The combat does evolve, and I think what helps is that most enemies are very different. I mean, mobs can be a bit annoying because they can swarm you, but every group of enemies has a different weakness, and every boss has a different weakness. So you have to learn patterns and learn skills and make sure you're fully equipped with all elements and all materia and things as much as you can squeeze on, and you just try stuff out. And I think that's what I loved about it. I grew with it. I grew with it, yeah. Like, it just kept getting better and better and better. And I think that the boss fights in this game I can't call a dud. Like, they're all extremely good. So I think that's where the combat shines the most, personally. But
I really liked to, I think it was in the weapon and armor skill stuff when I was looking at some of the footage. It very much reminds me of Bugenhagen's, is that his name?
Yes.
No, Nanaki's dad.
yes, Bugenhagen, the grandfather, yes.
Yeah, the grandpa, his like solarium thing, whatever.
Yes.
It looks very much like that, and I was like, oh, they even injected that in there, even though we're nowhere near that part of the game.
Yeah.
But this feels very much like that, exploring the cosmos.
Yeah,
kind of scene. I love it.
Yeah, I saw that, and it's also really similar to the Crystarium in FF13, the crystals that each character has to learn their skills off of. So, yeah, it was a cool visual nod, I thought.
I was definitely skeptical of the user interface when I first got hands on it, because it reminded me of 15, and I was like, ugh, I really did not like that one. But it's pretty intuitive, and it's pretty stylish. I liked it quite a bit. It's not quite as stylish as, say, like 12's, menu layout and everything, but it's pretty good, and it's pretty intuitive.
I found it amazing when I was playing the demo just how much it evoked the classic Final Fantasy turn-based system without being that system.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got a really good balance between them. I haven't really tried a lot of classic mode. I know it's a little bit easier, but I think that this combat, like, you can either set up macros or shortcuts, or you can select from menus. I did a bit of both because, like, for some moments I do need action to pause. Like, I do need that second to breathe. And I love watching the characters go in slow motion as well. That was very cool.
Yeah.
It was pretty ridiculous watching Tifa, like, jump up to attack a Drake or something, or fall down or something like that. I don't know, I just like silly things like that. But yeah, it was it really balances the old and the new really well.
It reminded me a little bit like VATS in Fallout games, where the world just slows down.
Yeah, it's exactly like that.
Right.
Yeah.
In a good way, for sure. Well, before we move on, since we've been talking a lot about this, because there's a lot to unpack here, I did want to... You can't step away from Final Fantasy VII without addressing the soundtrack.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. Okay.
It's really good.
It really is, what I've heard from it. Oh, my gosh.
Incredible. Like, Masashi Hamauzu is probably my favorite composer who worked at Square. And so the minute I knew he was working on it, I was like, okay, we're safe.
Yes.
Oh, it's so good. It's one of my favorites of all time. Like, I love the original 7 soundtrack. 13 soundtrack, which is the one...
did great.
Yeah, 13 soundtrack, which is the one he predominantly worked on, is one of my favorites, and he brings every bit of energy from that into this. So, yeah, and it's astounding. Like, it's so good. I could rave about it all day.
I will die on the hill that Blinded by Light is the best Final Fantasy battle theme.
Oh, it's so good.
So I was really excited to see Hamauzu working on it as well. And there's so many, there's some tracks that just they feel like greater fidelity versions of Seven's original soundtrack. There are some that feel like just complete reinventions in a sort of like a ragtime style in some sort of way, kind of evoking the feel of the sort of 40s and 50s inspired soundtrack of Fallout games. And then there's sometimes where you just hear a motif from the 7th soundtrack in a completely different setting, and it's I really have very little criticism of it. It's pretty flawless in my opinion.
Yeah,
yeah. Lena, you had mentioned there was a few tracks that sometimes just could have used one less arrangement, but overall, yeah, you didn't seem really too sour on it either.
Yeah, I mean, that's me being really nitpicky. Like, I think Aerith's theme maybe has about 10 different arrangements, or has quite a few. It doesn't lessen the impact of that song because, Aerith's theme is iconic, and for me, it's one of the most visceral soundtracks in the original game because of when it happens and what happens when it plays. But yeah, I'm literally nitpicking there. It's me going like...
Gotcha. You just had to do something. You had to say something.
I just had to dig the knife in a tiny bit. No.
Now, I was noticing you can collect songs or something. Like, does it have like a music player, kind of like 15 had, where you get like an MP3 player that you can just change with the tracks?
Pretty similar. So there's a side quest. It's kind of a side quest. It's a collectible thing. So you can buy like CDs across the game, and they are essentially like... Joe brought up jazz and ragtime versions that sound like 40s and 50s music.
Oh, cool.
You can put them into jukeboxes throughout the game and play them, and there's 31 of these CDs. Most of them are like covers from the original game. They're all very good. And then there's one that is the song from the Honeybee Inn.
Yes.
I just find it weird because I saw in some of the footage that we had that you go up to like a vending machine that's like music and potions, and it's just like one music track, but it's a very weird vending service.
Yeah, there's some cool nods.
We've already been talking about this game for quite a while, so I won't belabor the point. But suffice to say, Honeybee Inn is really good.
Oh, it's so good! I was so happy with it. Like, if there was one bit I was more scared about than anything else, it was Honeybee Inn, because it's aged poorly, and even at the time I was uncomfortable with it. It's so good in the remake. Like, it's very different, essentially.
I would hope.
Different and so worth it. Yes, definitely. But it's really good.
The gym sequence, is that a good time too?
Yeah, I mean, some of this. I know some of you have been going through a lot of pain with some of those side quests.
There's a pull-up side quest that like I gave up on after about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes of trying to complete the hardest difficulty. I feel like Zach like broke his hand on it.
Yeah, he definitely did.
That's, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm usually good for like 10 pull-ups, so I don't know. No, I kid. I'm glad they've expanded out. Yeah, it's just nuts that they've put so much extra content, and I'm glad it doesn't feel like it's too much padding. I mean, you said there was a bit of it that, it just seems like it was just in there just to kind of pad it out, but for the most part, it seems like, again, it felt like you were nitpicking, because if you had to draw attention to a flaw, that would be one.
I wouldn't say I was. I mean, personally, I think the padding is the worst part of it. I think there are some. I think this is where my personal love of Final Fantasy VII comes in, because I think there are some bits in the game that just do not work, and I don't like certain bits, and there are some things that they changed that I don't like, but again, this is where people's personal opinion will wildly vary. Like, I've spoken to people who love bits that I didn't like and who hate bits that I love, so yeah, a good chunk of some of the padding doesn't work. Like, the chapter with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse does work. That is not padding. That is excellent character development, but there's some chapters that are like, oh, here you go, you can just go back to the same place a second time and do something, and, you know, just, it didn't need to be there. Like, why do I need to do a dungeon twice? And the boss twice. The same boss twice.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that's like.
Not at all.
I found the most kind of egregious padding, and this is basically like my main criticism of the game, although it's not, like, it isn't that bad, but it's very noticeable that they that the padding a lot of times isn't just like, oh, there's a 2-hour segment that didn't need to happen. It's slowing the game down by having like clouds slowly moving through rubble or something, or having to slide past a wall that would be, you know, much slower than just running past it. So there's a lot of that where it feels like there's probably collectively a good couple hours of the game that is just from you having to walk slower and to move through
just
an area terrain. Yeah, and so, and like, it works cinematically and such, but it is also very noticeable that it's like, yeah, this feels quite padded. So
yeah, it's their way of eliminating loading times, isn't it? It's an invisible load, basically.
But it's really not. It's not a deal breaker by any stretch, I don't think.
That's good.
And this is still a fantastic game.
Oh yeah.
It sounds like it took everything from the original, from the music to the art design, and just used that as a framework to create something, to expand on it. But it doesn't sound like it betrayed its origins, which is lovely to hear.
Yeah, because that was definitely the biggest fear I think a lot of us had.
Yeah, I mean, your money may vary by the end. But I would say 90% of the game does not betray the origins of the original.
Interesting. I really hope that Gact makes an appearance now at the very end.
Oh, people keep saying this. People bring this specific thing up. Crisis Core does get a brief mention. There is a character who gets name dropped, and I was very happy about it. And it's not Genesis, I'm afraid.
That's fine. It's all good. It's just very funny to if there's something so egregious that is setting off the ending. I was like, what else could it be? But anyways, that's all fair.
It's gonna be something from Advent Children. it'll just
God.
Yeah, it just ends with Tifa going dilly dally shilly shally.
Or
at any rate,
Shilly-shally.
I would not be surprised if for the next couple of chapters, if they really dug deep into Crisis Core and Advent Children for plot points, like if they really just make this Final Fantasy VII R encompassing all of the Final Fantasy spin-offs in one way or another. I wouldn't be surprised, because they got to get story from somewhere.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love a little bit, at least, definitely.
You can
if
have
Peter
Crisis...
Jackson can get away with it with the Hobbit series, then making that into what it was, then I'm sure we can get away with it in Final Fantasy VII, when the whole rules for this whole game series has been anything goes. So
I can deal with some Crisis Core, but I don't want to be playing this game and have someone just screaming in my ear 50 times, "Where's Mother?" I don't want to hear it.
Maybe we'll get like a corridor shooter moment with
oh God, with Dirge.
Vincent. I mean, I didn't mind Danger Servers personally, but I get the grief with it. At any rate, Jono gave us a nice segue by bringing up repetitive gameplay mechanics and dungeon retreading. How's Bravely Default been going for you, Jono?
Yeah, I played it solidly from the recording of the last episode. I finished it. I absolutely friggin' adore it. I love it.
So you weren't sour on like the big moment that we were trying to avoid spoiling for you during that episode, but like, as anyone knows, if you don't, spoilers. Bravely Default starts bringing you on through this kind of time loopy kind of mechanic where you start going through the game repetitively until you figure out, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do.
I absolutely adored the mechanic. It's funny. I think this is the kind of thing that some people might like or might not like. I personally love the narrative device of parallel universes. It's one of my favorite science fiction concepts. So the fact that this game unexpectedly delved into that was no problem. Also, to be completely honest, I didn't find about 90% of each, I guess, cycle repetitive. Because each time we discovered something new about the bosses that we were refighting, they were all stronger, so it wasn't like I was just killing one with one hit. They were level appropriate, so there was still the challenge level there. And we would learn new character traits and new relationships between these various characters as we went through each cycle. The only thing that I found repetitive was the Awakening of the Crystals. That was it. But all of the side quest material, all of the side quest content was... I loved it. I thought it was great. I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game. It just is. I know it's Bravely Default, but it's Final Fantasy. It has all of the conventions, and the number of Final Fantasy V references in this game just made me laugh constantly. You have
right, as you brought up, yeah.
Yeah, you have a character with amnesia. You have a battle on a big bridge. You have the job system.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's but they're references. They're not direct callbacks. They're just like little moments that evoke the feeling of these games.
It reminds you where the roots come from. I mean, its predecessor that laid the groundwork was literally Final Fantasy for Heroes of Light, so they weren't shy about it there, but they wanted to kind of go off on their own thing with a new system. I think that's the only thing that really sets it apart is just the battle system more than anything.
Yeah, and the battle system I think is phenomenal. It's not active time, it's classic turn-based, but by using the Brave and Default system, they really make turn-based into something very special. It makes it more tactical. There's a certain the fact that you can affect the ebb and flow and then take command of it in such a strong way is really rewarding and something that would have been really welcome even just in Final Fantasy when you were in the very first one, because otherwise feels very simple in its world building and its story. It feels like a natural evolution of the classic turn-based battle system. Like it's surprising to me that no one really did that in the Final Fantasy before Bravely Default, and they've continued that and they developed it. I'm currently playing Bravely Second, which I have many opinions on, and obviously, which we'll get to shortly. Yeah, obviously, I reviewed Octopath Traveler, and I'll play the demo of Bravely Default 2 after I finish Second. Mm-hmm. And it feels very much like Bravely Default. And Joe, I know Alana hasn't played Bravely Default, but Joe, you played a bit of Bravely Default. Mm-hmm. And the combat, I would say, is probably one of the better parts of that whole thing. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think it's a really great turn-based system. It was basically that, like, I haven't really seen many turn-based systems that I think are better or on par with that. Maybe Final Fantasy X. I really like that in terms of like a pure turn-based system. But Bravely Default is pretty great. Yeah, and I mean, my favorite part about Octopath Traveler was the battle system, and the fact that Bravely has a slightly more primitive version of that battle system, and also, in my opinion, has exceptional characters, relationships, and an overarching story. Just made this something really special for me specifically. It's been literally sitting on my shelf for about 4 years now. I bought it years ago and I haven't played it. I played the first 5 minutes of it and I was like, wow, this seems great. I don't have time. But then, quarantine and everything. So I'm like, well, I have it now. So I've been really hammering away at my backlog, which is considerable, but I've gotten through a large chunk of it in the last couple of months. And I'm so glad that I played this. I had so much fun playing it. It is a very fun experience, and again, a lot of that is because of the combat aspect. The job system gives it so much flexibility, and it's just, again, it's that next natural evolution of the Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy V, arguably Tactics job system. Like Tactics definitely perfected so much of it, and this definitely takes on that to give you some more flexibility with how you want to build your characters while also still keeping it in check.
But you can only assign certain ones based on the amount of I forget the point that you have a certain amount of points that you can kind of
the abilities in this.
I think it is just straight up AP points or whatever. It's cool that you that they still limit you in because but you can still break the game regardless, even within those limits, as we discussed a bit last time too.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
Did you have a game breaking character by the end of it?
Yeah, I had 2 of them. I mean, once you get Mime.
What were they? Yeah.
Once you get Mime, I had 2 pirates doing quad damage physically with. So I would hit them up with, 1 quad, and then I would have them mime their next turn. So I'd be getting 9,999 every single hit.
Gross.
Which was great, but at the same time, at that point, it's like, okay, keep these 2 alive for as long as possible, and the other 2 are just support characters. Which there's strategy in that. The thing that I was really not curious about, I found interesting was, I don't know if we were talking about it a bit in the pre-show, but this Bravely Default kind of makes me think this is the game that the people who did Final Fantasy Dimensions wish Final Fantasy Dimensions was. For anyone who doesn't know, Final Fantasy Dimensions was a mobile RPG that used a classic Final Fantasy graphic style. Well, it used the graphic style from the remakes of Final Fantasy V and VI for iOS, but it still evoked that kind of thing, and it used the job system from 5, and it was very much like a sequel to 5 in terms of all of its mechanics. And I had a great time with it years and years ago, and I think the site gave it, we gave it an 80 back then, way before my time. But this pushed the formula of Final Fantasy forward in a way that just didn't. And that's a tricky line that retro RPGs, or games that are trying to evoke retro RPGs, have to walk. They have to be able to push the formula forward, introduce new mechanics, while at the same time evoking memories of the old ones. And there's a lot of ways you can go about that. You can go about creating using basically all of the assets from the old games and creating a new story using old systems, or you could push it forward like Bravely Default and use some of the conventions of it, but make it its own thing. Or in the case of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you can take the original and use that as a foundation and then create a very, very modern game using the components like the music, the character designs, and build something completely new off it that's remarkably good. I think all 3 approaches are legitimate, but I personally like the second. I personally like how Bravely Default did it. Admittedly, I haven't played 7 yet, and once I do, I may fast change my mind. But yeah, I loved this game. One of the things I found very interesting about it was how Bravely Default and Final Fantasy VII Remake, they're both offshoots of the same evolutionary. They're both from Final Fantasy. They both come from Final Fantasy classic turn-based RPGs, and they've ended up in very, very different places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Joe.
I think that it's kind of like Bravely Default seems, they do kind of have these 2 different ideologies to them in a way, where Bravely Default is this sort of, it's a parallel more so than a reimagining, where it's supposed to be kind of like a companion piece to these older Final Fantasy games with these turn-based combat systems and such, and the characters and the crystals and everything. And then with Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's like trying to it's like what you think your memories of the game are. Kind of like how Shovel Knight is an articulation of that sort of nostalgia, but there's more sound channels, and there's an enhanced color palette, and so it's kind of looking at the past through rose-colored glasses in a way.
Absolutely, and I mean, Octopath Traveler has that too, where Octopath Traveler looks like I remember Final Fantasy VI looking.
Mm-hmm.
Man, could you imagine if you'd gotten a fun pre-order gift that was just literally an accessory that was rose-colored glasses for your characters? They just call it what it is.
It'd be perfect.
But yeah, it's interesting to see how the evolution can go either way of paying homage through an alternate version or just directly doing the remake. I mean, we have the Trials of Mana one coming up soon too, and we can already see through the demo and stuff that that's a very faithful remake, just like 7. I mean, the demo doesn't really let us know if there's much more that they've evolved beyond the basics, aside from the mechanics of the game. But yeah, you can go either way.
Here's a question. I'm just curious, for everyone. Let's say that after Final Fantasy VII Remake, they decide that they're going to do a remake of Final Fantasy VI. So Final Fantasy VI Remake. Now, no, that would not be controversial at all, but which direction would you guys prefer it went? Would you prefer that Final Fantasy VI Remake go towards Final Fantasy VII Remake, in the sense that you're just, you're using modern gaming conventions, you're making a modern game, or would you prefer that it pushed it more in the, make it look like Octopath Traveler, use a lot of the same character designs, but give it that sense of depth and everything?
I know a lot of people, when Octopath came out, were straight up like, I now want FF6 in this. And, that seems to be the natural thing for it, to pay that direct homage to the Super Nintendo era. It's probably the best way to go about it. But I also want to offer the argument that if we did it in this Final Fantasy VII Remake engine, imagine what suplexing a train would look like.
Right.
Oh.
I mean, they brought in the Madhouse or whatever, so I mean, it can be done.
It can absolutely be done. Oh god, that is such a hard question, because I feel like even with a 7 style remake for 6, there's so much you can do with it. Much is made of 6 in that it manages to build up all of its 14 characters so well, and they're all so good. Imagine what you could do in a remake of 6 with all of these characters. Even Umaru would probably get a really good storyline out of a remake.
It would be so much longer if
It
this
would
is what
be.
even is what they're getting from this. Everyone would have their own complete side chapter of meanwhile, I mean, even as it is in the World of Ruin afterwards, where you're tracking everybody down and going through their individual quests, you'd get so much more of that.
Yeah, I think so. But God, I really struggle, because 7 is not one of my favourite Final Fantasies, so I am okay with where they went with it. But had you say 6, and had someone suggested 9 as well, I'm right in the middle of a dilemma, because I'm immediately no, don't touch them, don't do anything with them, kind of thing. So
They're perfect the way they are.
they're not, unfortunately. But yeah, I could see it going either way. I mean, I'd love to see some kind of 7 remake version of 6, because that would blow my mind. But yeah, I also would love Octopath, because Octopath's visuals are stunning, and I could eat that up all day, basically.
I would say from I guess I'm trying to I'm trying to think about the different standpoints you could take from it. From a business standpoint, I guess, if Square Enix is just trying to kind of maximize profits, I think they would probably get similar sales out of whichever one they would do, but it would be more profitable for them to do it in sort of an Octopath Traveler style, and just get a better localization or something like that from it. I mean, I played the SNES version of Final Fantasy VI, so it has kind of a rough translation. It's not the best. It's a Woolsey, it's a Woolsey translation, so it has its rough edges.
It has its charms, but
it has its charms, like having a character named Vix instead of Biggs.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But I probably would want it more in that sort of Octopath style, and I would want them to be focusing, putting resources into new IPs and the sort of still working with Unreal Engine, because I think this engine is working wonders for them. But it's also thrown off by how much I'm enjoying Final Fantasy VII Remake, because I'm just thinking about what would I do if I got to see Cyan or Cyan in having a cinematic take on his his story, because I think his arc is just fantastic in Final Fantasy VI. So I'm torn on that because I really would like to see that.
Well, yeah, and like the opera scene, or
Oh my god,
with
The opera
Sally's
would be
alone on that
ridiculous.
island.
yes. Yeah.
It's funny, before we had the conversation about 7, I was actually leaning towards Octopath Traveler, but after hearing you guys talk about 7 and thinking about like the idea of the music and the character design and the world design being foundational, I think I'd love to see a Final Fantasy VI remake in the style of 7 Remake.
I think it would be ridiculous. It would be so good. I'd just be scared, but then I guess that's because we love it so much.
Yeah, I think I'd be as scared of the Final Fantasy VI remake as a lot of people were about the Final Fantasy VII remake.
Yeah, I would be as well, I think. But yeah, seeing that opera scene, and I think the Celeste bit would absolutely get me. Like, if they managed to capture the feel of that bit at the beginning of the World of Ruin and expand on it and, like, build on her character, like, I think I'd be floored, honestly. I would be...
Just
I wouldn't
couldn't finish
recover.
the game. Just catatonic.
It's hard to do anyway. It's such a difficult scene anyway that, yeah, if you nailed that feeling 26 years later.
Yeah. The right
now,
acting in that scene would just sell it beautifully.
What if they remade Final Fantasy VIII but gave it a halfway decent story? That would be pretty.
Oh,
Pew pew pew! Shots fired from a gun.
No.
But I am curious if after this, if they're just going to go back through the rest of the quote-unquote PlayStation trilogy and try and remaster 8 and then 9. I would be curious.
I'm with Alana. Don't touch 9.
yeah, don't touch 9. Make it faster. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
Speed it up
Make
a
it-
tiny bit.
Which they did, kind of.
Yeah, just
Too fast.
You fast forward.
have a better port of it on the console, so it's not the mobile port, and actually have the backgrounds in full resolution along with the models, and we're golden. That game is pretty. I love that game. So
Yeah, it's interesting what they will or won't take from the 7 remake and decide if they're going to remake something else. Or I'm pretty certain after 7 remake's done, they're probably going to go up full on to 16. But
Probably.
I don't know if they're going to wait until the end of quote unquote the series of Final Fantasy VII, or if they're going to do it in between at some point. Like, it's just where the resources are, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess the nostalgia is mostly for 6 and 7. Those are the two that regularly pop up in people's, like, which one would you prefer, 6 or 7, or things like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's never 7
5.
and 9 or 5 and 10 or something like that. It's always 6 and 7.
And poor 8's always left out in the cold.
Oh, I mean, 8's weird, but I love it in such strange ways.
I know. Your review of it was great.
If it didn't take itself so seriously.
Exactly, if it just embraced the space stuff and just went absolutely nuts with it.
if its characters were actual characters,
If its characters were actual characters, yes, I agree.
and not just shooty boy with a cowboy hat.
Oh gosh, Irving. Hit on everything. Should have been a bard.
Yeah, but I mean, those are the various types of remakes that I was thinking about. But there's another thing that's currently popular, which is create a brand new game, but create a brand new game today, but it's a throwback essentially. And Greg, aren't you playing something like that right now?
Yeah, I picked up Pillars of Dust for a review. So that's coming from Retro Games, which, they know what they're doing.
Wow,
but
that is
Retro
on
Games
the nose.
Exactly. But it's spelled like French. So it's like retro and then like OEAUX. So it's Retro Games.
Oh.
And then their publisher is Something Classic Games. So like they have a genre that they're trying to capture. They have a mood. And it's really fun. It's really trying to capture, I would say, maybe less early Final Fantasy, more early Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior, depending on how or when you played it. But it feels very much like a SNES RPG. That's at the very beginning of the life cycle, so it's like a hedge higher than a Super Nintendo, than any regular Nintendo one. So they like a little bit more colors, kind of like what you were saying, Joe, with Shovel Knight. That the color palette is a little bit more enriched from what it is, but I'd say aesthetically, it's really trying to capture the Nintendo vibe. But like they have some really cool boss monsters and other stuff like that they've amped up. Combat's a bit more like Dragon Quest in terms of the display. But they've done an interesting thing with their battle flow that differentiates it from being that classic retro aspect. And it's, you have your menu you go through, and you can do an attack, or you can do an ability, and you have like 4 abilities you can assign out. They've also made it that you can kind of hotkey them, so you can make a bit faster if you want. You can assign them as like pre-assigned on your buttons on your controllers or whatever, so you don't even want to go through the menus. You can just tap R1, and then it'll do this fireball attack or whatever. So that's kind of neat. And you only have a party of 2, because you get you can go and recruit an ally and bring them in, and you can swap them out. So it doesn't have like this big expansive cast of characters. They're trying to keep it pretty simple, but you do have 2 main heroes, and that's where it gets really interesting. Like it's very weird that it's trying to play up a lot of the retro stuff. It's doing a lot of nods to it. It's anachronistic though in its dialogue, so that can kind of take you on a little bit, and I think that's part of how they're trying to break the fourth wall and call attention to what they're doing. I don't know, it's weird. Like there's some times where it's a little too on the nose, and I'm just like, just leave it, let it just be what it is. And then the other times it's actually, it suits. It's a very weird thing, because that's the thing I find like a lot of the very obvious retro nods do is a lot of it happens in like Cthulhu Saves the World and Breath of Death 7 over by those fellows. They want to get anachronistic and break the fourth wall, so like they're trying to say like, we know we're doing an old thing and we're not taking it too seriously.
They make it into a commentary of those games, right?
And sometimes that's fine, but sometimes you can go too far, and it's just like, just let the game be what it is.
Yeah, that's Zeboyd's thing, though, isn't it, really? I think it works for them, but then you've got, like, this isn't an RPG, but it's tied to something that is going to be an RPG. I'm playing through The Messenger at the moment, and
right.
I love it so much.
And that does a lot of that, where it pulls some really weird dialogue choices, and I'm a bit like, you don't need to go that far. Like, why are you being referential? It's obviously pulling onto things like, there's a specific bit where they're like, oh, it's Joe Shinobi, and I'm like, yeah, I know this is the game you're, like, parodying and stuff, but I'm not being parodying, but I'm not at the spoiler bit, so don't spoil what happens beyond. Something happens, doesn't it? It changes up the gameplay a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there are bits like that I'm just like, like, you don't need to be so on the nose about it. Like
and we can
Greg
only
was
hope
saying,
Sea of Stars doesn't do that.
I don't think it will. It feels like it looks like a very different thing. Whereas, yeah, like you've got Zeboyd Games who their specific thing is, and kind of like, I mean, Earthbound. Earthbound is a parody of Dragon Quest in 1995, and it did all of that really well. Yeah, so it's like,
there's a fine balance you can ride. Yeah, you can either lean heavily into it. At least with Zeboyd, you know what you're getting. They've made it like that's their goal, is to draw that out. But yeah, I just find there's a lot of games like I'd be fine taking this game seriously for what it is. But like when you start the game off, you get to choose between 2 characters. You have Prince Carlton or Greg with 2 G's, and it's very much like they're not shy about it either. Like, you know how most games you can go to a bookshelf and they'll say like, oh, you found a dirty magazine, or oh, there's a bunch of books about the elements or whatever. Like, it's very general stuff. This one has, again, very anachronistic versions of or titles, but also or kind of a retro take on it just to make it fit the medieval theme. But like they'll have like the Prince and the Pauper, which is like on the nose for basically what this is supposed to kind of seems to be gearing up to being. So like you're in this world that is kind of more or less in ruin. It seems for at least where the Pauper character, who's Greg, where he lives, he's a blacksmith's apprentice and lives in a tent, and most of the rest of the town is like the slums. But then a ghost character kind of guy, we don't really know yet, kind of appears and is like, you have a great destiny. You are born of royal lineage. Go on a quest and find out. And he's like, okay, sure. Got nothing better to do. I guess I'll go on this quest. And so that's kind of where that starts off with his buddy. Is it Bobby? I think it's your first like ally who joins him. And then meanwhile, Carlton is a prince who grows up in a rich castle on an island that's kind of isolated from everything that affected this other continent. So it's actually still doing very well and flourishing. But his dad, or his uncle, who is the king, has his classic wizard advisor is like, in order to become the heir to the throne, you need to go and complete a quest. So go and figure out what happened to the mainland, kind of thing, is the loose kind of what's going on. And so they both go on their quirky little kind of quest with a bunch of random side things. There's a guy who really likes cheese, so there's a collectible cheese that you can find. It's apparently like this ancient heirloom cheese that you can collect, and he'll unlock just little bonuses for you. So it's just a fun little unlock thing. Every chapter has challenges, where there's this bizarre character who kind of seems like he's aping on like your classic narrator, record keeper kind of thing, but he just kind of starts with everything being like, hey, for this chapter you need to find this many secrets, this many nuggets. Nuggets are the currency in the game, and this many orbs. And orbs are these things that when you find them, it's the only way to really increase your stats at a decent level, because there's no experience in this game. It's weird. You just kind of level up. It just happens every once in a while. Like one of your stats will go up because you seem to have like an attack. You seem to have like an agility, a special ability, kind of like a special power stat.
Okay, it's not random like Saga random, is it? Please tell me it's
don't
not like that.
think so. I don't know. Like I said, it's hard. I'd have to do another playthrough to see if they are set out, like, do you think certain things level up, or if it's based on what you're using. I'm not sure. And then you have your hit points, and then you have your action points, which lets you cast your spells, specials, whatever your abilities. So your AP never increases through combat. So like I've leveled up, and I've gotten like my special's gone up, my attack has gone up, my agility has gone up, and my HP has gone up. You can find, when you find these orbs, they will also let you, sometimes some of them let you choose which stat you want to raise, and there's another one that always just gives you HP increases. So the challenges that this guy has set out, if you complete the challenges by finding the secrets, the orbs, and nuggets, that's where you raise your AP. So like the meta challenge is the way to let you get more powerful in terms of like how much more spells and stuff you can cast. It's interesting the kind of like the leveling dynamic they've given you in this game. So there's no real like concrete way to it. And then you have all your equipment modifies just those things. So you can have like, thieves' shoes that will increase your agility but will reduce your attack, or you can get really high armor that reduces your agility but increases your defense a lot. Or I think right now I have like a wizard's cloak or something that gives me good magic, good fleeing, and good defense but lousy attack kind of thing. So there's a lot of customizability, which I do like, with the equipment and how you want to grow your characters using the orbs and such. So that's pretty neat. Like I've made one very focused on just doing a lot of special attack damage, whereas I think I made Carlton, he's going to be more agility and a straight up attack. Because the other thing that's interesting about this game, and why it's bizarre with the stat progression and stuff too, is every single battle at the end of it, you just get healed up. So the game encourages you just go balls to the wall in every single encounter. And some encounters are easier than others. Like some of them, even just your regular mobs, but there's still a challenge level to all of them, because if you wait too long, there's a little counter, I think that it's called phases. And so the enemy enters a new phase, and then all the enemies get more difficult. So if you stretch out the battle too much, it will get harder and harder for you. So you're encouraged to, just unload on everything as fast as you can. And that's, I find, pretty standard. And so you get to some enemy parties that you can run into by accident or at random rather, that are made up of like 4 or 5 enemies. Then you might start running the risk of like, oh gosh, okay, there's all starting, like, I can only kill 1 or 2 in the first turn, and these 2 other ones are starting to slowly beef up now. So it can get definitely really dicey, and then you get more of that strategy in the boss fight, where you're trying to weigh how much of your AP to use. Should I use it to buff my other player so that way his attack is good when he runs out of AP? Should I buff my defense? It can get a nice little instrument of strategy in there from what you would expect from your classic turn-based, just whack 'em, take some ether, heal up. I mean, there are ethers, there are healing potions you can use, but again, they're finite. There's not a lot of them. But I found I didn't use them most of the time, but sometimes in the battle, you're definitely like, in the final, but like boss battles and stuff like that, you can find yourself needing that, because as the enemy starts getting stronger, the hits get noticeably harder. So I kind of like that ebb and flow. I think they maybe could have sped it up a bit to raise the stakes a bit, but ultimately it's a pretty neat game. And I was surprised by how much I was enjoying it. So it's cool that they're capturing those classic mechanics, but again, like turning them around a bit, like Bravely does and such, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I mean, you have a retro in this episode. We had a solid retro game. We had a a game with some retro elements, but is a modern game. And then you had Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is a completely modern game, but used a retro game as a foundation from it.
Yeah, it's an interesting look at all the different approaches to what we have for, I guess, capturing our nostalgia these days. Because, as we've all said, the nostalgia glasses definitely add a certain element to how you look at things like Final Fantasy VII, 6, and Dragon Quest, any of those games, right? And, going into the remake and seeing it now as you like, oh, it was totally just like that back when they were Popeye arms, right? Like, that's exactly how well this story all came out in my mind. But it wasn't. But they have definitely done due diligence to their fans by doing that, whereas Bravely, I guess, it takes itself seriously, so it's not trying to really call out too many of the RPG tropes and everything that it treads on, but it also is very reliant on its players to be okay with the simplicity, so to speak, of the world and the combat, that it isn't requiring big epic mechanics as to compared to some of its contemporaries at that time, right, which were pushing the envelope. This was going back to what made Final Fantasy simple and easy, and just easy to dive into in the first versions of it, right? So, and then you got Pillars of Dust and other retro games like that are just straight up very much begging you to forgive them for diving straight into your nostalgia.
Those retro ones are so hard to balance out, though, aren't they? Like, I find sometimes I love them and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I wish they'd push the envelope a bit more, and like, there are some that are just literally like, oh, we love this game, so here is a literal version of it,
right,
in its own, in a different, like, set of clothes or something, and I'm just like, yeah, but you need something. You need some character or some warmth or something else to,
like,
give it flavor.
Sorry, you could argue that, like, Torchlight is more or less that, in a sense, right? Like, it was just like, we really liked Diablo, but we're just going to give it a fresh coat of paint. And their story was interesting enough to kind of separate it a bit, but more or less, if you never had it, you still had Diablo, right? Or if we never had gotten Diablo, Torchlight just would have been Torchlight. And yeah, some of them are very obvious copies, so to speak. Not really, but...
I don't really know what the original Torchlight, I don't know what the reception is, but I know Torchlight 2, people adore it, so I'm not sure.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe there was a jump there. I'm not as familiar, unfortunately, but I'm trying to think of, like, I guess Tokyo RPG Factory are a bit guilty of this with their games. I have not gelled with any of their games, yet all of their games are literally like, Chrono Trigger and something else, and Oninaki, their third attempt was something completely different and still fell flat, and it was like, they're just not capturing that thing that made something so great, and it's such a hard balancing act to get right.
I think with video games, it's tricky. I mean, most artists, and people who make video games are artists, their earliest attempts are pretty much literal copies of their heroes, their favorite things. That's where their inspirations, and it takes them a little while to figure out their own voice. And that's the trick with video games, is because they're considerably more work than most other art forms in terms of, like, budgeting, and it takes a couple of years and beta testing, etc. So when somebody really hits it out of the park with their first game, it's even more astounding. And then there's those people, and that you play a game and you're like, that was cute, that kind of reminded me of that, but didn't really do much for me.
Right, yeah.
Well, exactly. You can play it safe, but you're exactly right. Like, you need to practice, right? And it's easiest to do that by following something you love and trying to, like, maybe iterate on it slightly, but still play it safe enough.
Yeah.
It's what also draws an audience.
And I think with games, it's so much different than, when there's a remake of a movie or something along those lines, or they're bringing back a TV show for a new generation because of how games age, because a movie from the late 80s is much more accessible than a game from the late 80s because of the kind of interplay of technology and how new the medium of video games still is.
Right.
Because, this is something that just basically was, I've heard it described as like cave paintings, back in the late 70s and such, and when you had Pong, and now you have things that are, sometimes quite literary, sometimes they're kind of cinematic in a way. And so it's so interesting how we look back at nostalgia for games and just how some of them age like milk sometimes.
Age like
And some-
Definitely.
Right? I mean, we all want to go out and play ET, right?
Yeah, of course. We all want to go out to that New Mexico landfill. I found this stunning ad from the late 90s, and I think it was in Nintendo Power, and it was it was about Castlevania 64, and it was like, look at Castlevania 64, look at these polygons, look at these 3 dimensions, and then look at the drab PlayStation, look at the Symphony of the Night game. How old does that look?
God. Yeah,
it's-
I know that exact ad you're talking about.
Yes.
And yeah, I look at it and I'm like, I hate Castlevania 64, and Symphony of the Night is one of my favorite games ever.
So
And
many
it's
people
like,
do.
oh my god.
That was the attitude back then. I remember it. It was
Yeah.
a side scroller in pixels. Blech, no.
Yeah, it's always so interesting to see just what things have aged well and what things have kind of aged poorly. I know with the Grandia collection that came out, a lot of people were still lauding the combat system, but then they were bemoaning the random encounters and just
Right.
how frequent they were. And so it's always this kind of give and take, I think, that we have.
It's interesting. I mean, the way I look at video game history, at least in modern times from like the 80s to today, like the Nintendo, the original NES and the Master System, they were more than cave paintings, but they were still very basic. And then the Super Nintendo and Genesis came along, and I would argue the Super Nintendo, more than anything, perfected or at least evolved the pixel-based graphics and gameplay of these various genres to a point where a late era SNES game is more than playable today. They're super, super fun. And then the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation came along, and there's a reason why no one's making retro games that look like Final Fantasy VII.
Right. Yeah. I know there was like a horror game that came out a few years ago that looked like Resident Evil 1, like PS1 Resident Evil 1. But yeah, like, it's so uncommon. Like, it's all 8-bit or, you know, the fun, like, Shovel Knight, the Messenger 12-bit kind of visuals, like the in-between, like, capturing that thing. Yeah, the pixel art is kind of ageless in a way.
It is. It's the difference between even, you can even see it in TV and film and such too. Like, you can go back and watch old episodes of, you know, the Super Mario Brothers Super Show and stuff like that, and it's a little janky, and you can see like the style, whatever, but it's still watchable. It still flows. It still looks good. But you can go back and watch Reboot when it was new, and there was the advent of 3D animation, and you can see like it's still fun to watch and everything, but you can see just how jagged and janky everything kind of is a bit more. It's so easy to let 2D just do its thing and age. Whereas, yeah, like you said, there's no one making a retro PS1 classic to make it look like, you know, those retro games when everyone didn't really know how to make it work.
There are, but they're not really all that popular.
No,
Certainly not to
exactly.
the level of pixel.
There's only one that I can think of off the top of my head, and that would be Anodyne 2, which
yes,
was
that's right.
which was building off of Anodyne 1, which was, you know, that was pixel, so it's kind of like they're making a lineage in some way. That's like, I think that's the only one that I can really think of that really is trying to evoke that PS1, those sort of PS1 graphics and look.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to evoke some of the gameplay, but the graphics just don't really work anymore.
No. People just want full-on good 3D.
Yeah, somebody
or nothing.
they want a better camera is what they want. Like, let's take like, for example, people wanted a new Super Mario 64, and they kind of got a version of that in Hat in Time. But Hat in Time's a beautiful game with really nice, you know, good designs, and it looks like a modern game. It plays very similar to Super Nintendo 64, but with modern touches. But I don't think that game would have worked remotely as well if they had like a actual 64-bit graphics mode, and that was it. But pixel-based games, yeah, sign me up.
It's probably part of it because, like, they, as was said, like, they evolved and kind of reached near their peak at that time. You know, since then we've had 2D, you know, sprite based and pixel games that that have gone kind of above and beyond it. Like when you look at something like Owlboy, but it's those early PS1 games. There are a lot of things that look a lot better than, Vagrant's story now. And at the time, that game seemed to have been revolutionary.
Right. It can't get better than this.
Yeah. The old thing of, graphics will never look better than this. And that's how that's how people felt about Final Fantasy VII at the time. And that's how a lot of us are probably feeling about Remake now.
Right? I mean, you can just loop that classic Legend of Zelda commercial. Wow, look at those graphics for every single generation of game, and where you're just expecting it to never get better than that height.
Pretty much. And I mean, the funny thing is, there is I don't know what era you would say this. When I wrote the Yakuza Remastered review, I talked a lot about just how huge a jump Yakuza 3 was from Yakuza 2, which was on PlayStation 2. And Yakuza 3 still looks like a modern era game. And there was a jump where I feel like graphical fidelity reached a point where those games are still playable today to pretty much anyone. They might say, oh, those textures are ugly, but it still looks like a modern game. And I would argue the PlayStation 3 era, do you guys think, is when that happened?
Like where we kind of hit our plateau?
A plateau. I mean, we've gone higher since, but to the point where we looked down the hill and went, holy shit. Oh.
Kind of, but a lot of the kind of PS3 360 era, for me, what holds a lot of it back is the color palette and look of it, because so many games are trying to capture that Gears of War, a lot of the gritty realism, and today it just looks kind of ugly.
Yeah, let's throw a brown filter on everything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why a game like Final Fantasy 13, for all its flaws, I think still looks pretty great today, because they weren't afraid to play with color.
Yeah.
That's why I was really disappointed Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning didn't go further, because that whole thing, because it was a really fun game, and it was the color palette was so vibrant and exciting when you compared it to its contemporaries at the time, like you're saying, Joe, that everything was kind of going for that more gritty realism. They were still trying to keep that fun, visceral combat and everything like that, but their world was just very fantastical and bright and vibrant, trying to, I always had said back at the time, it was kind of like Elder Scrolls and World of Warcraft had a child. And that's kind of what this game was, with those bigger, chunkier, a bit more stylized kind of worlds and characters, but also still very much grounded in its storytelling and its depth of scope and lore. It was interesting. But we could have used more of that.
And it also depends on the developer. I mean, Joe, you're completely right. Final Fantasy XII still... I'm not even talking about the remaster that got released last year. I'm talking about, on the PlayStation 2, it still looks friggin' amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I pushed that thing so hard. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, Final Fantasy X still looks friggin' amazing. And I think that's because it's square.
Mm-hmm.
And it's vibrant and exciting, right? It didn't just try and muddy everything down into the realism, because that's when I think when it gets too far away from the stylization, I think that's when it starts to not age properly. You could even Kingdom Hearts looks pretty solid on the PlayStation 2 still, because the characters are so character, right? Everything's so animated, and maybe that's why we do why we feel 2D ages, right? If we were looking back at too many 2D games where they basically just tried to do a very realistic 2D, it would look pretty gross and probably not work out. And the 2D art of Wing Commander, for example, with those character portraits and stuff, probably doesn't look as good now. Certainly the live action capture probably hasn't aged very well. So the fidelity of it.
Good old Maverick Blair.
Right? I'm curious, and if any listeners have any thoughts on this stuff too, the direction they prefer and where they feel we peaked or not, so to speak. I'd be interested to hear, because it's a really fascinating discussion.
I really think Mark Hamill should just be in every game in some fashion.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
If only for his good energy.
Yeah, I remember when everyone thought that he was going to be Don Corneo in the remake. He's not. I was like, please.
What's his name? Fred
Tatsicor.
Yeah. Who's still great, but
yeah, he's still wonderful. But yeah, Mark Hamill was.
For a
Rock
second,
out
I
the
thought you were
next
going to say
game.
Fred Durst, and I was like, that's amazing.
Oh my god, no!
Jesus, no.
I just imagine, the gang walk into Don Corneo's place and just, yo! just,
Oh my god.
Welcome
God.
to my crib.
oh no. Please, no. I don't want to think about this.
That being said, speaking of rappers and Final Fantasy VII, if you haven't listened to Mega Ran's Black Materia album, which is fantastic,
Oh,
where he kind of
yes.
basically raps the Final Fantasy VII story, but his Don Corneo portrayal in that is ridiculous. It's such a ridiculous rap that he made up, especially when he's like, I use a hula hoop to hold up my pants.
Oh my gosh.
His characterization is really funny in that he had a blast with it, and I was just like, I'd take that as a Don Corneo. I'm in. Before we close out, because it's pretty topical, we got a really nice email from Jeremy Arthur, who I haven't chatted with for a while. He was asking us about stuff back when we talked about Fire Emblem a bit on one episode, way back with Nathan and such. Anyways, he was just giving us some great feedback on his love of Bravely Default and Octopath Traveler, which is apparently in his top 10 of RPGs. So it's pretty high praise, which, I don't know, it seems pretty par for the course. I don't know, is one of, Rob used to talk about a lot on the podcast about the whole revisionist history, where a game comes out real hot, but then several years down the line, people start looking back and they're not as keen on it. And I feel like that might be happening to Octopath, where everyone was super high on it when it came out for a good hot second, and then now people are kind of going like, well, it has its flaws. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it was pretty mixed when it came out. I think I'm one of the people who really loved it, but I know a lot of people went in expecting Final Fantasy VI and they didn't
They
get
ended
it.
up with a saga game, basically.
Exactly. And fortunately I went in with that. Look, I thought I was expecting a Saga game and I kind of got it.
Yay.
But I'm not sure Octopath actually, like, it's got its sects, and I think maybe now a little bit some people are like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I don't know whether I'd replay it necessarily now, but I do still really love the time I had with it. If you're thinking about things, I don't know whether I've definitely had that moment where I've liked a game a lot and then looked back and gone, actually, no, it's definitely of its time. But I can't think of a specific example right now.
I think the one that Rob kept bringing up a lot, I think, was Skyward Sword, I want to say.
Yes.
Oh god, yeah,
That
that's
was
such
his
an
one.
obvious one, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not the right person to ask about Zelda, so...
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of games from around that sort of late PS3 and Xbox 360 timeline have been coming up in that discussion in terms of, and maybe that's just because of the time we're in right now, but, Skyward Sword and Skyrim has been getting, a bit of flack as well. Fallout 3, and the one that I've been thinking about a lot is BioShock Infinite.
Yes.
In terms of that game, when I talk about a game aging like milk, I haven't put hands on it in a couple of years, but
Now I'm hesitant to play it.
It's not an RPG, so won't go too much into it. But the story really hits rock bottom by the end in terms of being like, this white supremacist slaver. I think he's like the same as MLK. Like that's kind of the thesis that they come to at the end, at least.
Infinite breaks my heart because you look at everything that came up to it, like the trailers and the gameplay footage and everything, and it's just, you look at the game it could have been, and then you look at the game we got, which, for its time was fine, and I agree with you, certainly hasn't aged as well as the original BioShock.
No.
I guess it all comes down to what is my general approach to roommate situations or coworker situations. There's always somebody that's the worst at work. Then that person quits or gets fired or leaves, and then somebody else becomes the worst person at work. You just didn't notice they were the worst person because the other person was worse. So with video games, it was the best thing we had at the time, and we think it was great. But until we start seeing something else that's better, we don't know that thing's actually not as good as we thought it was. It's interesting.
And if you wonder why there's no longer a worse person at work, guess what?
It's me.
Oh no.
Or we all got laid off. I don't know.
No one's at work right now.
Yeah.
I was going to say, this makes me think of something that's kind of the opposite, and I guess Zelda kind of suffers from it as well, because I know there's a good chunk of the Zelda fandom that think that Breath of the Wild is the worst Zelda game. I've got news for you guys, it's not.
My God.
I Pokemon is another series
Oh,
that
yeah.
whenever a new game comes out, the newest game in the series is the worst. And then whatever game they previously disliked now is like, oh my god, this was so good. So there's like the opposite as well. Like Black and White had this huge renaissance, and I was like, hang on a minute, where were you in 2011 when the game was good? Like, it's always been really good. Where have you been?
Right, and I'm sure there's many people that feel the same as you do. But yeah, it's weird how divisive opinions are. It's interesting.
I mean, Doctor Who has that exact same thing. The best Doctor is the Doctor before the one we currently have.
Definitely.
Right? Mm-hmm. But that's one of the things though that Jeremy does mention in here regarding Octopath and stuff like that, and how like Alana was basically saying exactly what he's getting at, that if you walked into it expecting it to be something it wasn't, you were bound to be disappointed. But he was saying like all the marketing materials said it was going to be what it was, so he didn't understand why people were criticizing it for not being something it was, when it's like, this is what Square Enix advertised it as. At any rate, clearly Jeremy is a fan of the Octopath Traveler and will die on that hill, and I appreciate him.
I think he's
for that.
I think he's a smart man. I think that's probably where they're going in the future. I would argue Bravely Default's going to be their Final Fantasy, and Octopath Traveler's going to be their Saga.
Yeah, just rebranding, so to speak, and trying it with some new twists.
Their takes.
Yeah, exactly. But he was also he was enjoying our talk of Bravely Default as well, and he played the Bravely Default 2 demo as well. And he thinks it needs some work. One thing he had mentioned that there was no like turn indicator during combat, and that's one thing now that he brings it up. I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been helpful to help you figure out when to use your Brave and defaults for the strategy. So I'm hoping that's something that comes in. They did release they being Square Enix had a survey that came out after the game. I've been getting a lot of those ones. It's kind of interesting that you get these game surveys now to get that direct feedback, which is great. It's probably the reason why 14 has succeeded, right?
Yeah, they did the exact same thing with Octopath Traveler.
Oh, well, there you go.
They did, yeah.
So it's good that they want to listen. So that's something he put in there as well. So maybe they'll listen and put that in. But otherwise, it's shaping up to be good. And yeah, he does think the in-combat dialogue outstays its welcome. I didn't notice it, but I do notice they do say things a lot, and it gets repetitive. I remember that back in Baldur's Gate, where you could adjust the frequency of how often they would say things, because it would get to be a lot. And given how small games were back then, they only had so many phrases, so it got very repetitive very quick. And it's a shame when you get a game where they don't let you modify that. Because I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know I've had some RPGs in the past that I've played, like even JRPGs, where they are always saying their comments, their catchphrases, and it's just like, oh my gosh, just stop. And I can't turn it off.
Jeremy, if you have any thoughts about Bravely Second and you're listening to this episode, send them to us, because I'm playing it right now, so I'll probably be talking about it in the next episode, and I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, because you're saying not to go too far into it, because we're going to wrap things up. Yeah. It's not landing as solidly as Bravely Default did.
Not quite, but it's still good, but it's...
There you go. Well, as Jeremy has done, all of you can reach us at podcast@rpgfan.com if you want to email us all the things. You can hit me up directly if you want at Greg D at, I can't remember my own email address, gregd@rpgfan.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Greg Delmage, and GDL me on our Discord. Jono, where can people find you?
You can send me some email at jlogan@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Twitter at JonoLogan.
Alana, how about you?
You can email me at alanah@rpgfan.com, or Twitter again. My handle is Alana Hagues.
And Jo Padilla.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as at EVA_least.
And as always, Jo is one of our social media folks. They have great insights that they offer on the social media page for RPG Fan, which, Jo, tell us, where is all of our social media?
You can find all of our social media on Facebook, RPG Fan. You can find us on Twitter as at RPGFancom. And you can find us on Instagram as RPG Fan.
And you can get all those hot takes whenever Joe's playing games, Mac's playing games, Tim's playing games. They're all pretty good about sharing, but I feel like, Joe, you kind of were starting that trend, which I really like, so we get some of those Joe thoughts that evolve into features.
Oh, they both evolve and devolve.
No, never devolve. But yeah, thank you so much for being on. If you want to keep listening to Random Encounter, there's lots of episodes you can go to. We have Retro Encounter, plenty of episodes of that to listen to. The Soul Blazer episode just came out that I was on, and that was a blast. Playing Soul Blazer again was super fun, so go check out our game journal of that, where all the game journals can be found with Retro. We still have Rhythm Encounter episodes kicking around, so if you want to go listen to the music, it sounds like people still want more of that, though. It's like we could do an entire podcast on it with our love of the Final Fantasy VII Remake soundtrack. And last but not least, we have Hat and Eric, who have the Phoenix Edge podcast, and you can go check them out with a lot more relevant discussion on current news and events in the gaming industry, RPGs specifically. Otherwise, Jono, Alana, Jo, thank you so much for being on.
As always, a pleasure.
Thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure. You're all really lovely folks that we're kind of gifted at this website that there's no bad eggs. We're all nice people to work with. I like it. And listeners, thank you so much for keeping us going, keeping on listening. For myself and all these wonderful folks about me, thank you so much. Have a good one.